Hi everyone, we are back with the Strange Encounters Down Under episodes, and in this episode we're going to go beyond Strange Encounters Down Under to Strange Encounters across the world and probably out into the universe, because we're covering remote viewing which actually can go anywhere. It's not actually doesn't have the parameters of time and space. Okay, so which is the ability to access information from locations without physically going there yourself. So I think that's a really interesting thing, an ability for people to have. What do you reckon, Ben?
Yeah, I think so. And realistically, I mean, everybody has the potential to do it.
Yes.
So I think that's the really exciting thing about remote viewing, is that yes, there's going to be people that have heightened sensitivities or greater talent than others. Like just the same when you play guitar, there's guys who are brilliant and there's guys who are hacks.
Yep.
So, but everybody can do it. So,
Yep.
and I'm pretty sure that remote viewing also applies that way. And I think like anything else, it's as much about practice
Yep.
as is about anything else. If you don't practice it, then you can't expect to be good at it.
Yeah. So let's just go back a step. For those who have never heard of remote viewing or don't really understand it, just sort of heard a bit about it. But generally speaking, is the ability to remotely or psychically see hidden objects with the inner eye or clairvoyantly. But it's more than that, because remote viewing uses scientific protocols to develop and extend that ability. And that practice results in ordinary people being able to do what psychics do. But like you said, Ben, some people are better at it than others. So now what some of you who do know about remote viewing is, some of you may not know that when you practice remote viewing, it's not just about seeing something, because people can receive psychic impressions of smell and sound and taste and touch, as well as sight. So actually, Ben, have you ever had experience remote viewing for yourself?
Not really, no. But I haven't really taken the time to sit down. Well, yes, I suppose in some ways, yes. Like we've all done the game where you sit there with a card and you got to guess what someone's holding. It's the Jack of Hearts, or it's the Ace of Spades or whatever. So I've done that before, but have I had any success with it? Well, no more than you would on a random, basis.
Yep.
That's and a funny story. At work we had those clinkers, and they've got different colours in them.
You mean those lollies?
Yeah, those lollies.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, we had clinkers. This is a real simple example of remote viewing. And my work colleague said, "What colour is this one going to be?" And I said, "Oh, yellow, yellow." "What colour is this one going to be?" "That one's going to be green, green."
Yeah.
And then I got three of them right.
That's a bit spooky.
That is a bit spooky. And then I got the fourth one wrong. So just brought it all back down again. But that's how simple, on a real basic level.
Yeah.
That's the type of experience that I've had. Have I seen a Soviet nuclear plant in Siberia? No, I haven't gone to that level and depth in my. But on a basic level, yes, I think a lot of people have probably given that level a go.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
How about yourself?
Well, it really depends on a formal remote viewing, which is the following protocols and doing it scientifically. No, but it is a form of psi, and I think that many people have a degree of psychic abilities, which they may just put down to intuition. But I think psychism and intuition are closely linked. But most remote viewers can be taught, and a lot of people can be taught to go to a location and accurately describe like buildings, geographic features, people, and activities. And then one of the things that I found really curious was that experiments have found that in many cases, the further away the target, the greater the accuracy, which to me feels a bit counterintuitive. But that's what they've found. And people can also be taught to see into opaque containers to describe contents and to read data and see images on microdot film. And I wonder if you remember when Uri Geller was quite popular, and there would be information in an envelope, and people would hold it and they wouldn't know what was in it. So it was a double blind situation. And he would be able to tell people what was in it. And I wonder, in that situation, remote viewing and psychic abilities, I think, are pretty much the same.
Yeah. I think that's pretty true. Like, I could say, someone would say, okay, Ben, I want you to travel to the Grand Canyon. Okay. And I've been to the Grand Canyon twice in reality, and I can picture it very clearly in my head, the Grand Canyon. There it is. I know where the benches were. I know where the fence railings were. I know where the main buildings are and all of that. I've been there. So I can get that very clearly in my head. But can I get it in real time? Can I see the Chinese gentleman in the green jumper holding on to a toddler? And can I see the busload of tourists and the number of the bus? No, that I can't do. I think it's a really big step to be able to see it in real time. And the other thing you'd have to take into account would be time zones. I mean, I could be looking at it now, and it could be nighttime over there. So that's the thing. Like, to get it to the point where you can go, okay, I have this vision of it, and it's live. This is it right now. This is like a webcam. I'm here right now and live. I think that's the challenge, and I'd really like to know how when you're sitting, when what you're seeing is live now and not laced with a bit of imagination.
Yes, I agree with that. But more about traveling across space and time as we go on. But as I was looking into this more deeply, I've heard of remote viewing, quite a bit. I've got some books on it. I've got this CD set by David Morehouse that gives you instructions of how to do it, etc. Gives you some longitude and latitude points to practice with. But actually, I was reading about the history, and which can be traced all the way back to at least 550 BC, when Croesus, who was the king of Lydia, he put 7 Greek oracles to the test. And the oracles were asked by messengers what the king was doing at the moment on the day of their inquiry. And turns out the Delphic oracle was the winner, who reported the sight and smell of a tortoise and lamb boiling in a stew in a brass-lidded covered cauldron, which Croesus himself had prepared. And I think that's pretty good, that that's where they can actually see inside a container, even though they weren't with the king and they weren't there. And if you don't know who the Oracle of Delphi was, her name was Pythia. She was a high priestess of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. And if you if you can Google, you can find a lot of information about her. But she was serving as its oracle, or psychic / clairvoyant / medium, who people used to come to from miles around to receive messages from or about their dead loved ones, and to receive advice on everything from growing crops to making money. Actually, not much different to today, really. We all want to know how to make money, don't we?
We do. What are the lucky numbers this week?
Yeah. That'd be funny, wouldn't it?
They're the numbers that I want to see. So it's about seeing an object, an event, or a person, or a location. That's sort of what it sort of narrows down to, doesn't it? You're looking for an object. That could be a nuclear power plant, for example. but that could also be a location at the same time.
Yep. Yep.
An event.
Yep.
Well, you could perhaps remote view the Queen being interred, perhaps if you had that skill set,
Yep.
or you might be able to find any number of people on the planet. And I have some later on. I have some examples of that.
Yes.
Where they can use them to actually locate people. That'd be very
Yeah.
interesting to see, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Which, if you think about it, the psychics / mediums who work with police on the quiet to help them find missing people, for example. Is it psychism, I guess you'd call it, or is it remote viewing, or are they very much the same? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's closely related to clairvoyance, isn't it? So
I think so.
yeah, there's a real connection there.
Yeah. And I was actually reading that in the past, remote viewing was referred to as traveling clairvoyance or telesthesia. And in the late 19th century, someone by the name of Frederick Myers, founder of the Society for Psychical Research in London, observed that traveling clairvoyance seemed to be a fission of telepathy, retrocognition, precognition, and clairvoyance. And sometimes the events or activities seen were displaced in time. And remember, we did that presentation or that episode on time slips. Or they had a sense of immediacy when, in fact, the events had already occurred or had yet to occur. So there's a bit of a combination, of that precognition and telepathy, etc., as he was describing. So I guess you can see why it was called traveling clairvoyance, because people's consciousness could drift across time and space. And some of his research was that sometimes people were able to carry on conversations with other people seen remotely and actually hear their responses. Interesting?
Yeah.
It is, isn't it?
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
How do you get onto that? That's, is that so? That's how much do you have to put into having that skill? Is it a natural skill that you have, or does it come down to training and practice? Obviously aptitude is there as a part of that. You have the aptitude for it, but how much. From what I've read, they put in hours and hours and hours of actual training as well.
In modern times, but in the past, I think shamans would have used these skills in a very similar way and they talk about sending their mind out in animals to be able to see through the minds of through the eyes of animals, right? And I think that's sort of like a form of remote viewing too, so they could see in the distance. It's an interesting subject, and the more I've looked into it, the bigger a subject that it actually appears to be. There's so many accounts in history.
It can almost connect to shape-shifting too, couldn't it? If you have the ability to be in the wolf and and that sort of thing. So I don't see it as necessarily being outright transformation, into one, but maybe on a psycho level, you can connect with a wolf or an eagle, or and certainly as in the shamanic practices, yes, that'd be very much a possibility.
Yeah. And just on that, before I head over to you, I just wanted to talk about an account involving Emanuel Swedenborg, who many will know about. And this actually occurred in 1759, because Swedenborg was renowned for his clairvoyance and remote visions. And one time when he was at a dinner party, he suddenly became agitated, and he left the room a few times, returning in a state of anxiety and each time getting worse and worse. And what had happened, he'd seen a vision of fire breaking out in his hometown of Stockholm. And he remained agitated about this for several hours, even though he wasn't actually there. And each time he'd leave the room, he'd return and he'd describe the fire's progress before he announced eventually that the fire was extinguished only 3 doors away from his home, like phew. And what happened was the following day, the governor of Gothenburg summoned Swedenborg, who gave a blow-by-blow description of the event to him. And then 2 days later, the governor received a report which matched perfectly with Swedenborg's description. So here he's not only seeing something at a distance, he's also pacing it, right? Pacing along with that progression of the fire.
As it's happening.
Yeah. Fascinating. That's fascinating.
In real time.
Yep.
Yeah, the practice has also suffered a lot over the years in terms of its ability to like proper evidentially based factual assessment of what results have come through. And there's also been a reluctance from people who actually do it to share it with mainstream scientists due to the naturally skeptic view that mainstream science has about this, and the whole thing is seen as a little bit pseudo-sciencey. And that's been going on for certainly well in the modern era. But you think back to earlier times like the Delphi and all of that I mean, they would have had their testing back then too, but there was probably a greater acceptance of it.
Yes, I think that's true.
In the past, and less resistance to it. Whereas, like all these things that we discuss week in, week out, on this show and many other shows, these things are we're also evidentially based these days, which is great, and we have to do that. But I think that also separates us from these phenomena as well, and keeps us at a distance sometimes.
I think you're right.
The ability to launch yourself into it and go, okay, I accept the possibility that remote viewing is a real possibility. Let's see what the results are. But there's always that antagonism out there when it comes to it. But groups like the American government and the Russian government, they have taken it very seriously in the past and have applied it in many different ways. So there must be something to it.
Yeah, and that's certainly true, actually. I guess we'll get on to that, but I just wanted to sort of bring it forward into the more modern era and a little bit of the background of remote viewing over the last 50 years. The actual term remote viewing was coined by Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff in the 1970s. After becoming aware of the previous work of a man called Rene Warcollier, who wrote a book called Mind to Mind, published in 1948. But he'd been working on that information for the previous 40 years. So we're going back, actually he gave a presentation at the Sorbonne, I think it was, in 1946. And so that takes us back to at least 1906, where people were seriously studying the phenomenon in modern times. But what happened was Targ and Puthoff used Warcollier's data and built on it when they coined the term remote viewing, and they established a research project at SRI International, and forgive me, I've forgotten what that stands for, probably Scientific Research Institute or something, or International. But it was previously known as the Stanford Research Institute in California. And after 10 years, Targ and Puthoff had amassed impressive results, concluding that remote viewing is a natural ability that occurs in the lives of many people. But what really put remote viewing on the map in the modern era was the CSI, or Cognitive Science Lab, at the University of Florida. And it received a lot of funding, and performed, I always say, follow the money trail. Performed extensive experimentations for the intelligence services from 1972 to 1995. And without this background, Project Stargate wouldn't have gotten off the ground, and the general population would never have heard of remote viewing. And we'll discuss Project Stargate in a bit. So did you want to sort of cut in there with some information?
Well, I was also reading that, with all the, it's funny, you've got two sides. You've got, those who are into it and those who aren't. But by the 1960s, the prevailing counterculture attitudes started to mute some of the prior hostilities. So as New Age culture emerged, people in general population became more open to the idea of remote viewing, and it wasn't just sort of like a fringe topic amongst the public. I'm talking. It started to become something of a bit more interest, and the popularity of the human potential movement provoked a mini renaissance that renewed public interest in consciousness studies and psychic phenomena, and helped to make financial support more available for research into such topics. Follow the money trail. So, where the money is where it is. And then, I've just also the two gentlemen you've spoken about there as well. So, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to add to that was the Cognitive Sciences Lab. If you visit the CSI website today, guess which icons show up on the research page?
What's that?
I thought you'd never ask. Well, first of all, there's the National Science Foundation, which you would expect, the National Academy of Science, of course, but then there's DARPA, which is the Defence Advanced Research Projects Agency, and the Department of the Navy. So, the intelligence services involved in those projects were basically funding CSI, and because they wanted to have access or wanted to know if it could be used for military purposes, if remote viewing could be used for military purposes, which indeed it has been, which actually brings us to the Stargate Project. Did you want to talk about that, or shall I? Or
no, you can go on. I'll dovetail in a bit later.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, for those who don't know, and I'm sure some of you have heard about it, the Stargate Project was a secret that everybody knew, US Army unit established in 1978, at Fort Meade in Maryland by the Defense Intelligence Agency and SRI International, which was a California contract, to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications. And curiously, some of the precursor names that and sister projects they had went by various code names. Like, I hadn't heard of some of these, which was Gondola Wish. There was Stargate, of course. There was Grill Flame, Project Grill Flame, Project Centerlane, Project CF, whatever that stood for, Sunstreak, Scangate. But 1991, they were all consolidated and rechristened as the Stargate Project. Now, the work primarily involved remote viewing, and it was overseen until 1987 by Skip Atwater, who was Lieutenant Frederick Holmes Skip Atwater, but probably most people know him by the name of Skip Atwater. And he was an aide and psychic headhunter to Major General Albert Stubblebine, and later president of the Monroe Institute, which I'm sure a lot of people are aware of, the Monroe Institute and remote viewing. The unit was small scale, comprising of about 15 to 20 individuals. And the information I found said that it was run out of an old leaky wooden barracks. But I've got a pretty good idea that it continued on into, which we've heard from other people, it continued on not in an old leaky wooden barracks, and it actually became a very classified project. The official story is that the Stargate Project was terminated and declassified in 1995 after a CIA report concluded that it was never useful in any intelligence operations. Excuse me while I cough, cough, sputter, sputter. But it's the program that was featured in the 2009 film The Men Who Stare at Goats, if anyone has watched that. Have you seen that, Ben?
Yeah, I have seen that movie, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there have been people who have come out since that time and said, no, there's a lot of psychic espionage going on.
Yeah, as much as there's the the computer hacking and all that goes on. They're all attacking each other in many different ways.
Mm.
Yeah, and even the UK government has also done research as well, like in addition to the Americans. And in 2001, 2002, the British government performed a study on 18 untrained subjects. So this is taking people who had no ability at all, and doing a study. And they recorded the electric field and magnetic field around each viewer to see if the cerebral activity of successful viewings caused higher than usual fields to be emitted from the brain. That was their goal. And the experimenters didn't find any evidence that the viewers had access to targets in the data collection phase. The project was abandoned and the data was never analysed since no RV activity had happened. And some narrowband electric fields were detected during the viewings, but they were attributed to external causes. And the experiment was disclosed in 2007 after a UK Freedom of Information request. So they had a bit of a go in the early 2000s. But that's only brief information about it. I'm sure there's more information out there about that. So, and PAIR's remote perception program. In the late 1970s, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, PAIR, carried out extensive research on remote viewing. And by 1989, it had concluded that 336 formal trials reporting of a composite Z-score of 6.355 with a corresponding p-value, I don't know what this means, 1.04 by 10 to the power of 10. In the 1992 critique of these results, the PAIR remote viewing experiments depart from commonly accepted criteria for formal research in science. And the lab responded that none of the stated complaints comprised the PAIR experimental protocols or analytical methods, and reaffirmed their results. So there's obviously been infighting going on through, and the whole thing about, verifying the results of, how do you verify your results?
Yeah.
And so while the government and the military might be fascinated by it, mainstream science is they dig their heels in on these sorts of things, don't they? The same as they do with UFOs, It's that same resistance from the mainstream, but the government and the military are up to their neck in it.
Absolutely. And the Soviets have looked into it quite deeply too.
Yes.
And they put forward the theory that remote viewing, but psi abilities is carried on extremely low frequency electromagnetic waves. Which is interesting. And also the Canadians and American researchers found that remote viewing is affected by geomagnetic activity, which I wasn't surprised about, because I had sort of had those ideas myself that somehow that would be involved. They found that a higher incidence of geomagnetic activity 1 or 2 days before a remote viewing test actually had an adverse effect, but low activity preceded successful test results. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
So, and you wonder if it's, like seasonal or ley lines, or, do any of these things, full moons, magnetic variations, like that stuff must have some effect on it, surely.
Yes, I think so. And just while I think of it, there was another person involved in remote viewing. That was David Morehouse. He was a highly decorated army officer. When he was hit by a stray bullet, he began to have out-of-body experiences. And as a consequence, he was recruited as a psychic spy for the Stargate Project, which we've just been talking about, which was one of the most secret programs of espionage ever instigated by the CIA and the Defense Department. Now, he wrote a book. Psychic Warrior Inside the CIA Stargate Program, the true story of a soldier's espionage and awakening. Very interesting book, very interesting. If people can get it, I'd say read it if you're really interested in this subject.
Yeah, I'll have to find a copy.
Yes.
Mm.
And Morehouse claimed to have worked on hundreds of remote viewing assignments, from searching for a Soviet jet that crashed in the jungle carrying an atomic bomb to tracking suspected double agents. He eventually blew the lid off the Stargate project and exposed it to the world.
Mm.
So he had his role to play in remote viewing too. Another book, if people are interested, is Joseph McGonigal on remote viewing secrets. This is a handbook on basically on how to do it.
Mm.
So it's an intense book. I know McGonigal is, I think he used to be on millennial people. There never used to be social media. So in those days, we used to use old email discussion groups. And he was on an international one that I was on, and he would often talk about. I seem to remember him talking about remote viewing for ETs and spacecraft, extraterrestrial spacecraft.
And he'd been doing that sort of thing, or it was a different protocol to use, or
No, same protocols. Yeah. And in fact, 7 years ago, there was a gentleman who came and spoke to our UFO group about remote viewing. And if anyone wants to watch, see that, it's about an hour and a half recording at one of our public meetings. If you go to the UFO Research Queensland YouTube channel, you'll be just go back quite 7 years ago and look for remote viewing with Lee Heather. And he talks about the protocols of how to do remote viewing. And Lee suggested that mugwort taken 3 times a week enhances our remote viewing abilities. It also interferes with our sleep cycle. So if you've got to get up and do the 9 to 5 thing or set hours or whatever it is, don't do it, because you won't get much sleep.
It'd be no good for me then, that's for sure.
Yeah. But he did say that taking mugwort, the effect works for about 3 hours, and then it plateaus out and disappears. He also talked about how ESP is enhanced by, some research had found this, that ESP is enhanced by 200 to 300% if done around 1:30 p.m. side real time. So you just have to go to some sort of time converter and check out your local time in that. And no one knows why ESP peaks around that time, but it does for about an hour. So you've got that's a natural ability, and then you add your mugwort, as well. I mean, you'd be buzzing all over the universe, I suppose.
Kicks in some bonus time, doesn't it, eh?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I came across a couple of things. I came across an example of some of the tests that they did. This one was in 1974. It was apparently quite a good test. And then I've also found some of the military applications that they've used as well. And this particular one was a swimming pool complex at Riconda Park at Palo Alto in 1974. And the viewing was carried out by a gentleman called Pat Rice, who was described by Russell Targ as one of their psychic treasures. And the target was selected randomly from an out-of-target pool of sites unknown to Pat Rice and Russell Targ, who was stationed inside what they called a Faraday cage. I'm not sure what that means, in the radio physics building of SRI, which we spoke about before. And Hal Puthoff and an associate, Bart, drove off the target site, which was about 5 miles away. And after the allotted time of 30 minutes, Pat Price was asked to view and describe the target site. And Pat said he saw a circular pool of water about 100 feet in diameter, and it was actually 110 feet. So there was a great deal of accuracy. He also saw a rectangular pool, 60 feet by 80 feet, and it was actually 75 by 100. But he's close. He went on to describe a concrete blockhouse, which was also on the site, and he drew a diagram of the complex. Pat said the site seemed to be a water purification plant and drew 2 water storage tanks and some rotating machinery, such as pumps. And after completing the drawing and description, all of them drove to the site to assess the accuracy of Pat's viewing. Everything was remarkably accurate except for the 2 water tanks and the water purification plant, which were absent. And Pat Price's inclusion of the non-existent tanks remained a puzzle for 21 years. However, the mystery was unexpectedly solved in March 1995, when, as a part of the centennial celebrations of the city of Palo Alto, a commemorative volume was published. And this brochure carried a picture of the Rinneconda Park site taken in 1913. And on the occasion of the inauguration of the city's new waterworks, showed 2 water tanks exactly at the location indicated by Pat Price in his 1974 viewing. And this amazing example brings out one of the most remarkable features of remote viewing, namely the ability of consciousness to access the past. And in remote viewing literature, it is referred to as retrocognition, while in ancient Indian texts, it is described as accessing the Akashic records.
The Akashic records, you mean?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
I thought
so. I'm looking at some small print as well, which doesn't help me at all.
Yeah,
it's just one example there where when they were doing the testing in 1974 of one of their subjects being able to find and locate with a great deal of accuracy, and even to pinpoint accuracy back to 1913.
Yeah,
actually looked like. So
yeah.
that was really, really good.
Yeah. Well, actually, I just thought I'd briefly mention, if you don't mind me butting in, is the Akashic records, for people who don't know, is the concept of it is that every activity and thought that we have or experience is impressed into, I guess you could say, the quantum field, really. And it leaves that imprint, and some people have the ability to access that. There are people who are Akashic readers, and they can access that. There are some people who can catalyze that, and it reminds me of a story of going back a while now, but the one of the ascended masters was Saint Germain, and he apparently, how the story goes in one of the books, is that he got Godfrey Ray King. He was out walking one day in the fields somewhere over in Austria or somewhere. I can't remember exactly now, but Saint Germain appeared. He gave him some sort of goblet and told him to drink this, which Godfrey did. And then Saint Germain then took him somewhere, and I expect it may have been out of body. I don't know. But Saint Germain supposedly had the ability to revivify Godfrey's life as recorded in the Akashic records, but not just now, but in the past as well. So he could show him many of his own past lives, which was interesting. Whether you believe the Saint Germain actually existed, whether that story is real, that's another thing, but that's how the story goes.
Apparently he's meant to be immortal and lives right through all periods of time.
Yes, he was supposed to be William Shakespeare, Sir Francis Bacon, a few other people throughout time, but he was known as the Comte de Saint Germain, and he was very well known in the French court. So but anyway, that's another story that we could go on with another time. Yeah, because that's a paranormal experience too, to be able to revivify the Akashic records and read them. Yeah.
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 So let's look at an example of them using it from a intelligence perspective. And the subject was a nuclear research center at Semipalatinsk. That's me butchering Russian, in the Soviet Union in July 1974. And this was the CIA's very first operational viewing assignment. And the viewer was Pat Price, who was the previous guy in the other example. And he was asked to describe what was located at a suspected underground nuclear testing site in the former Soviet Union, known by the code name Peanuts, as in PNUTS. and the CIA indicated that it was of great interest to them. They had in their possession a spy satellite photograph of this location. And Pat Price was given only the geographical coordinates of the site in degrees, minutes, and seconds. And this type of viewing is referred to as coordinate remote viewing. And he was told that the site was a research and development test facility. And the government's representative decided that if the viewer described either the known multi-story crane or odd structures resembling oil well, then they would continue. And Pat's description of this remote site, in his own words, was, "I'm lying on my back on the roof of a 2 or 3 storied brick building. It's a sunny day. The sun feels good. There's this most amazing thing. There's this gigantic crane moving back and forth over my head. As I drift up into the air and look down, it seems to be riding on a track with one rail on each side of the building. I've never seen anything like that." This viewing assignment continued for a couple of weeks, during which he drew pictures of the gigantic gantry crane and many other items at the site, such as a cluster of compressed gas cylinders, which were also visible in the satellite pictures. The gantry crane was moving on 8 large wheels, two on each of the 4 legs. This unique feature was confirmed by the satellite photos. The remarkable similarity of his drawing of the crane and the satellite photo was just really uncanny. And in later sessions, Pat described the activities in the interior of the building on top of which he was lying earlier. He explained that people were assembling a giant 60-foot diameter metal sphere using thick metal gauze like sections of an orange peel, but the workmen were having trouble welding it all together as the pieces were warping. They were therefore looking for a lower temperature welding material. And SRI researchers were later told that the site was the super secret Soviet atomic bomb laboratory. And they also learned that 3 years later, from a news item published in Aviation Week magazine, that the sphere, which was about 58 feet in diameter, was intended to capture and store energy from nuclear-driven explosive or pulse power generators. So that shows that he was actually at that location. In some capacity, he was there, describing, with a high degree of accuracy what had been in the spy satellite photos.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's just amazing.
Yeah. Actually, that some of the information that Lee spoke about when he was speaking at our meeting, our UFO meeting. The reason he was there was because I'd invited him to come and speak, was because he had been involved in a remote viewing group to RV the moon and Mars. And they reported, of course you couldn't corroborate it, but they had reported that there were extraterrestrials living underground on Mars. But he had a lot of one of the other things they picked up with his group picked up was that do you remember the Hale-Bopp comet that came flying through in the 90s, 96, 97, I think it was?
Yep.
They reported that it had a companion flying with it. And I think from memory, that companion, or maybe the Hale-Bopp comet, I can't quite remember, maybe it was the companion, that that was the place that the Heaven's Gate cult committed suicide and believed that they would actually go there. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. That was a very, very famous cult. And
very sad too.
Yeah. They all killed themselves. So
they did. But the other part of that story was a Japanese observatory did indeed confirm that Hale-Bopp was flying with the companion because it took a photo of it. And I remember at the time that was made available. Remember, this is 96, 97. Not everyone was on the internet in those days, but some people had got their hands on the photo of it. And I remember, I think Lee brought a hard copy of the photo to our meeting to pass it around. So I thought that was really interesting that they'd remote viewed. There was a companion with the Hale-Bopp comet and the observatory confirmed it.
That's incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they're the sort of cases that I find really interesting when there's that external corroboration.
Yeah, you've got the viewing report, and then you've got some scientific, confirmation of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe we should have a bit of a chat about how you remote view,
Mm.
because I thought to myself, this is all fantastic and interesting stuff. But I thought, how do you go about doing it? How can someone at home actually try this for themselves and see if they have the ability to do something really simple, or maybe you can see what's going on the moon as well. So, so we'll have a bit. I did find some information on what to do. So they say select a range of targets. Ask a friend or a family member to select 5 to 10 pictures. Ask them to cut the images from magazines, etc. Paste them onto a blank white sheet with one picture per sheet. And the images should be real world pictures, such as people, architecture, nature, and ask them not to pick a target that may be offensive or disturbing to the viewer. So, you could do, I don't know, Niagara Falls, an elephant, maybe choose a famous person, and you ask your assistant to put the images into an envelope. And so you put them into a manila envelope, face down, and say absolutely nothing about them to you. No clues, no hints. And you'll view them one at a time, getting feedback after each session from the face down target at the top of the pile. So you've got to quiet your mind. You want as little mental noise as possible. And I think this is where meditation comes in, probably as a very handy tool for anyone who's doing remote viewing. So quieten your mind down. Let go. Write down the date, time, and any ideas you want to let go of that may distract you while you're viewing. So get your mind nice and still. Call the first target to mind. Begin the session by describing the most basic impressions you have of the first target site, event, or person. What do you feel is the predominant thing in the target? Is it natural or artificial, surrounded by land or water? And write several descriptors down for your first envelope. Do not second guess yourself. Write down the first thing that comes to your mind. The fainter, the better. Just make sure you write down the information as descriptively as possible and don't judge anything that comes up when you're looking at it. Connect the dots unconsciously. Information is coming from your mind and nervous system. The idea is that your unconscious already knows everything that there is to know about the target. It just has to communicate that to your conscious mind. And it does that through your body with very subtle sensations and feelings. Describe the basics. Write down sensory information that comes up, like visuals, smells, tastes, and temperatures. You may start perceiving size, shapes, and patterns, also known as dimensionals. You may even start to feel an emotional reaction to the target. All this is very normal if you're doing this exercise. Draw a sketch of the target. Take your time and don't worry about how your sketch looks, but take the time to draw what's coming through. Find a bird's eye view. Imagine yourself floating several hundred feet over the target area. Is there anything surprising about the target that you can perceive? Make a note of your final impressions about that target. End the session. Write down the time and a brief summary of what you perceived. Get some feedback. Pull the top photo from the envelope and see how you did. Take your time to really look at the colors and shapes of the image and compare it to your notes. You may be surprised at the results. So you may have been looking at a stone bridge, but you may have been having grey coming to your mind, for example, or maybe a sense of weight or something. So you might be surprised at how the unconscious is trying to communicate this to you, and that's the whole point of the exercise. So you're not necessarily going to see an image of a bridge pump into your thing. It might give you other clues as to what it is. Well, review and repeat. If you didn't connect with anything in the photo, don't despair. The main point of remote viewing is to learn about yourself, not just to be accurate. And remember that remote viewing is an ability you may cultivate. That's the important thing. You may cultivate it. It takes repeating the process all the time, and let go of the need to be right and have fun.
Actually, Lee talks about that in his presentation on the UFO channel too, and he actually, I remember he was saying that at the end of the session, you actually write stop on your page, so and that sort of just so that information stops flowing to you.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, he was also he was saying very similar things to you in that do about 15 minutes meditation beforehand so that your mind settles and your right hemisphere and left hemisphere sort of communicate better. And can get that because you have the information received by the right hemisphere, but the left hemisphere has to write it down, and I think he also said, don't expect to get anything right. Basically, you have to do it for about a dozen times at least first before you even start to remotely
get some viewing,
remotely RV, and get something even just slightly close to what you are trying to tap into. Yeah, but sorry, go on.
I reckon I might give it a go.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm going to give it another go, but
yeah,
you know what? I already have because but not recently, not in recent times, because back in 1995, I bought a property and I opened a new age centre for a few years, and at the time I was teaching Reiki. I won't go into that, but basically during that workshop, one of the exercises I had was for half the group, I think it was about 8, so it was about 4 guns down at that side of the room, which was actually a big hall because it had previously been used as a dance hall, and 4 of you guys down on the other side. And I said to them, I want the 4 of you to focus on an orange, and I want you to send that image to the other group. And guess what? All of those other group got something that was round, bumpy, because oranges have that sort of that
texture,
that edge. Range from golden brown orange. It was certainly round. I think one person actually picked up tarty flavour or something like that, but they all got it right and I was so surprised.
Interesting.
Yeah. I practiced that myself, so it was a collective group sending it to another group, but they were receiving it as individuals.
Oh.
So that's probably my first and only experience with remote viewing, if you could call it that. I didn't think of it as remote viewing at the time. I was teaching psychic development as well on top of Reiki, but yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's really good, and even something as simple as that is bringing results.
Yeah, and it was all new to them too. And there is a thing that when people try things initially and they haven't had experience with it, they're much more open to results. They're often highly successful, more successful in the beginning than they can be over time. Except, that's probably a mixed bag, right?
Yeah, because I suppose you got to say that ratios or percentages have to come into it too, don't they?
Yeah.
That you're going to have a certain amount of success if you do something, whatever that mathematical equation is.
Yeah.
And you're trying to push it beyond just that dumb luck aspect of me guessing the clinkers. So, you need to, and as you said before, like you have to do this multiple, many times. And keep practicing. Not give up after a couple of goes because I can't do this.
Yeah, exactly.
You might be selling yourself a bit short on that, particularly if you sort of have sensitivity in yourself.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And again, remote viewing, telepathy, precognition, akashic records, it all sort of, it's all part of the one bag, isn't it? Yeah. I was even thinking that time slips might be part of that bag too, because we've covered that before.
Yeah, we have. Yeah. That's one of my favorite and most fascinating topics is time slips.
Absolutely.
I really love it. Very fascinated by it, and I firmly believe in it.
Yep.
So even though I've not necessarily experienced it beyond, oh, where did the time go? Beyond that level of experiencing it, but I'd love to have a genuine time slip experience. And I think anyone who does is very lucky.
Yeah.
It's like a close encounter as well,
Yeah. So people, if you're watching this and if you want to give it a go, give remote viewing a go, let us know. Try it. Give it a bit of a practice. Put your results in the comments below this, eventually if you get some results, or on our Strange Encounters Downunder Facebook page.
Yep.
And we'd love to know how you go. Maybe we'll do it together, Ben, because we're in different parts of the country.
Yes, that's good. Maybe there's people who watch this who might already do it. So,
well, you know what? Some years ago, when again during the 90s, because a lot of stuff happened then, amongst the many UFO reports that I received, there were also reports from people talking about these psychic visitors, and that they would feel that they'd wake up and they would feel there's a presence in the room. And there were people toying with remote viewing then, as it was becoming, because then it was quite public knowledge. There was a lot of people in the UFO community, at least, who were talking about it, seeing, and it was quite, thinking about it was quite active, put it that way. Sort of dropped off now, I think.
Yeah.
And we had people like Ingo Swann, his book came out, and he was one of the top remote viewers for intelligence services, etc. But there were people saying, I wake up and I sense a presence in the room. And I started to think, maybe there are presences in the room, because these people had close encounters. They had psychic spies who were spying on those people who'd had close encounters psychically, trying to watch if maybe they were dropping in from time to time to see if there was some sort of alien abduction experience going on, or, some sort of encounter going on. Who knows?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, isn't it?
So, we've been interpreting things in so many different ways, but maybe we've sort of been off a bit in many of those, not really getting it accurately what was really taking place.
Yeah, that's true, exactly. And each decade we've got our own thoughts about what was happening at that particular time. But as time moves on, and the 90s are quite a ways back now.
Yep.
And our knowledge about all the quantum fields and everything keeps growing all the time. It's just going to keep on. It's going to keep evolving our thoughts about it, for sure.
Yeah. So, anyone watching, if you've enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. Remember to tap the bell so you get notifications of future episodes. And just keep expanding your interests and your knowledge about the subject, as we do, because we don't know everything.
Absolutely not.
And we probably learn as much as you do along the way, digging in and doing the research about these subjects, and talking to people who've had these unusual experiences too, no matter what they are.
There's nothing like doing a podcast to really broaden your knowledge base. Doing all the research to find different topics, your knowledge just starts to explode.
Yeah, makes you do your homework.
It does. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. So there you go, folks. Hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. So take care, and bye for now.
Bye for now.
Bye.